Marc Zell, chairman of the GOP in Israel, thank you for joining me.
Pesach, it's fantastic to be with you. What a day.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I bet it's fantastic to be anywhere. So this is a really big victory. You know, and we're so focused on the minutia of the Electoral College and the votes and the popular vote. But, you know, when you pull back the camera, big picture, this is really a sea change in U.S.-Israel relations going forward. We've seen a really radically different policy from the Biden-Harris administration to the Trump administration. What do you think this victory means for Israel?
Well, first of all, we're going to have leadership, real leadership in Washington. And with real leadership in Washington with Trump and Vance, we're going to have a different Middle East. Because when there are enemies here in the region, Iran and their surrogates, looked back at D.C., all they saw was weakness and fecklessness, and they just ran rampant over the United States and over Israel. They tried, at least. I said, now that real courageous leadership is coming to the White House and the Congress, God willing, they'll take a different tune. And I think I heard today that the Houthis suddenly announced that they were going to stop interfering with international shipping or whatever it is in the Red Sea. I mean, that's classic proof positive of the significance of this, which, as you described it, a sea change in Washington.
So, Marc, you're responsible for the GOP in Israel, but you're also the chief legal counsel for the GOP around the world. The
right,
GOP
outside the United States.
Outside the United States.
Right.
So, what impact did the votes, do we have any idea what type of impact the votes of the GOP outside of the United States might have had on this election?
Well, I can tell you one thing that the Trump campaign, the impact it had on overseas voters. For the first time in history, a presidential candidate, now president-elect, has taken the position that the double taxation of expatriate Americans, with all the FATCA and the FBAR and the whole bureaucratic nightmare that expatriate Americans have to deal with, they're going to take a look at it and they'll try to deal with it and solve it in the next tax bill that's coming up in the Congress. That's happening. But also,
that's a pretty significant change that's gone under the radar. We tend to focus on geopolitical issues.
Here in Israel, we do.
But you're saying that for expat Americans, like myself, like yourself, there's actually, we might see an easing up of the tax code for us.
Well, I mean, just to get rid of citizenship-based taxation, that's really what we're talking about, okay? And to go on to the type of residence-based taxation that's followed in almost 99% of the countries on the planet, okay? And for most overseas Americans, these are the real issues that they care about. Here in Israel, the kind of mundane tax issues, fiscal issues, are eclipsed by the geopolitical concerns that we have here. Okay, the survival of the Jewish state and terror and the Iranian threat and so on. So that's one thing that's happened. But the other thing is, like, for example, President Trump and Vice President-elect J.D. Vance made videos for us, which we use to encourage Israelis here, American Israelis, to register and vote. And that was a big thing.
So how did that go? I mean, I know that according to the embassy, according to the State Department, there's somewhere in the area of 500,000 expat Americans living in Israel.
The State Department says there's 750,000 Americans in Israel.
How many eligible voters is there?
And we figured about 60%. It's just kind of a guesstimate. That's about 500,000, 450, 500,000. And we were able to, in the course of the campaign, reached out or virtually door knock something well over 300,000.
Wow.
Yeah. And many of those, maybe even most of them, voted. Okay. Now we don't know exactly because they didn't put their ballots through us in most cases, but they sent them in themselves or carried them to the United States themselves or whatever. But it was just enormous. I've been doing this as a volunteer for something like 38 years. And I've never, in the entire time I've been doing this here in Israel, I've ever seen anything that even comes close to the degree of enthusiasm and commitment. I mean, people were calling us. It was really amazing. People that had no idea. They're American citizens. They had no idea they could vote abroad. For example, a lot of Israelis who became naturalized Americans came back to Israel and later in their lives and thought, like most Israelis, that you can only vote when in the country where you have your citizenship. But they never even dreamed that they could file absentee ballots in the United States, and it was quite an experience educating them and helping them to vote.
That's amazing. I mean, the numbers you're talking about, there are actually states in the Union that don't have as many voters
maybe 10
as
or
we
11,
have here in Israel.
10 or 11 states, the Wyomings and the Alaskas and so on, that have an equal or lesser number of eligible voters as we have in Israel. I mean, that's quite extraordinary, and that could change the whole face of the election. Maybe even it did. Okay, it's possible.
Do you have any sense of what percentage of Israeli or expat Americans who live in Israel voted for Donald Trump? Is there any way to?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you based on we were in touch with a lot of them, and with one exception, it was a woman lone soldier who voted in Nevada. Every single one of thousands of people that contacted us were voting for Donald Trump and the ticket.
So when we look at, like, let's say the poll that was well publicized about a week ago from Channel 12 that said that 66% of Israelis prefer Donald Trump, do you believe that number? Do you think it's low? Do you think it's high?
Well, it's really not. It's not the same question you asked. That number relates to the total number of the total Israeli population,
right,
which includes Arabs and Jews. All right, but the number that I cited, the 90+%, very approaching 100%, relates to American citizens in Israel who have the right to vote, and so I think that the Channel 12 number is low, quite honestly, but it pales in comparison with the enthusiasm and the support for the Republican Party that we see among American Israelis here. And the interesting thing, Pesach, is that these people were largely registered Democrats before they came to Israel. Okay?
Wow.
And when they came to Israel, there was a whole kind of seismic shift, tectonic shift in the way they saw the world. And they suddenly became Republicans because the Democratic Party went off the rails, left Israel, unfortunately, and what was left is a Republican Party that's embraced Israel and has supported it, and now we have a president and vice president-elect who are committed to Israel's security and prosperity and the future.
So have you been in touch with the Trump campaign since the big victory?
I haven't. Look, I had an opportunity to meet Donnie Jr., the president's son, just before the campaign, before the election. And I've been in touch with him and his partner. And they're amazing. I mean, what an amazing family. You saw them up on the stage in Mar-a-Lago, this morning when the president spoke, gave his victory address, which was very special. And they're a special family, and it's been an honor to know them. Yeah.
So we're at a moment where Israel faces some very critical strategic decisions. We're at a critical moment in this war in terms of what direction it's going to go, especially in Lebanon and dealing with Iran. But we're also heading into a transition period where we have a lame duck presidency that is not so favorable to Israel. I saw a headline in ARUTZ yesterday that said that there's an expectation that there's going to be a very strong push for a ceasefire. There's a lot of suspicion.
There's a threat by November 13th. If we don't agree to their ceasefire terms, they're going to suspend arms shipments.
So how do you think the Trump victory, even though we do have to deal with the Biden administration for the next 2 months, how do you think the Trump victory impacts how Israel responds to this pressure, or just how it plays out?
Look, the defense minister was fired on the election day.
That's true.
And I couldn't give you a better answer to your question than just to cite that example. That would not have happened, okay, I think, if the powers that be in Israel and the government had not made their own determination based on their own very intimate experience and an encounter with American politics, that this election was going to go the way it did.
What do you mean?
Well, Gallant, the defense minister, was known to be very friendly, let's put it that way, with a Biden-Harris administration. And
some accused him of being a proxy for them in the Israeli cabinet.
Okay, there were some that were doing that, and I'm not going to go that far. But there was no question that he had a kind of a special relationship with them that he frequently liked to exploit by traveling there and having, we say in Hebrew, 4 eyes, face-to-face conversations with his counterparts in the Biden administration. And I think that was one of the reasons why the prime minister had to let him go, because he just was not adhering to and giving a proper emphasis to Israel's overweening national security interests, as seen by the government and the prime minister in particular. So, but I think this is I'm not quoting anybody. This is my own assessment. Is that at the time that when the powers that be here in Israel determined that there was likely to be a change in government, in the next couple of months, that the election would actually turn out the way it did, they decided to take a gamble and to get rid of the fellow that was really cozying up to the Biden administration. And he was the defense minister of Israel.
That's an interesting analysis, because you might think that they would wait till the end of the transition. We still have a couple months where you have to deal with the Biden administration. But based on what you're saying, it's almost like they were signaling to the Biden administration that they no longer have the access.
That's the way I see it. That was your question, and I think that's an important step for Israel to take, quite honestly, during this transition period. This administration, the Biden and Harris administration, can do a lot of damage in the 2 months that remain before the inauguration. And there are indications that we've heard from prominent members of the Democratic Party. They're going to even try to prevent certification of the Electoral College vote. So on January 6th, ironically. So there are a lot of things that could happen in the next couple of months, and I think it's very important for Israel kind of to lay out its own independent course, and to quote Donald Trump, to put Israel first for its for those of us who are living here and citizens here, and just like the president calls for America to be first, for American interests. That's the whole, really at the bedrock of Donald Trump's worldview about borders and nation states, and the importance of maintaining the integrity of nation states and borders in a world that is being driven by a lot of these progressive elements towards globalization and globalism. And so I think, I'm really pleased that the Israeli government put its foot down and said, enough, we have to take care of our own, as they have been doing in the past several weeks, facing up to Hezbollah eliminating its leadership, facing up to the Iranians and attacking, stripping the Iranians of their air defense, in the last retaliatory strike by Israel, and really, and I think this is very important. And now with this Hoodie announcement, which really came out of left field, which seems it's very reminiscent of what happened when Ronald Reagan, 40 years ago or more, took office in 1981 after defeating Jimmy Carter in the 80 election, and that hostage crisis that was then captivating and the airwaves and
when the Iranians took American hostages.
Yeah, for 400 and some days, whatever it was. And as soon as Ronald Reagan took office, those hostages were on an airplane to Algeria and back to the United States. Something like that is happening. It could well be happening, and that's a good thing.
Well, Marc, one final question. This has been this is a remarkable victory, and of course, it wasn't even a squeaker. It was really something of a landslide, and you personally have been devoting months and months to this victory. How are you going to celebrate now that it's in the books, now that it's in the bag? I know you haven't slept much the last few days, as I can imagine, but how do you plan to celebrate this great victory?
Well, I don't want to disappoint your audience, but I'm not a big celebrator. I didn't do this in anticipation of celebrating it. I did it for at great personal expense, both family-wise and financially and everything else, because it was important for the Jewish state, it was important for the United States, and important for the world, quite honestly. And now that it's happened, okay, I'm just, the best celebration I can is just like we did a moment ago, is just to raise a glass and say l'chaim and just and move on and look forward to a new age, maybe a golden age in American-Israeli relations, as Donald Trump himself has described it.
Marc Zell, thank you for joining us.
Great to be with you.